Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter? I was the child in this case. I don't remember any of this, but when I was 4 we traveled to Ireland to visit my dad's grandparents. We were walking through a shopping area when I started yelling about wanting to see the train and ran into a shop. My parents ran in after me as I was going nuts about some train. There was no train, it was a clothing store. The woman working there asked my parents what I was doing as I was just running around, frantically. I finally yelled, "The train." I had found, in the back of the store, a framed newspaper clipping from the 1940s of the front window of this shop when it was a toy store and there was a big model train scene set up. Not a parent, but apparently, I looked like the male version of my mom's grandmother. But creepier is apparently I act just like her and talk like her, and think just like her. She died 10 years before I was born, I think. Maybe even before that. And lived far, far away. The creepy part is none of this feedback comes from family members. It comes from random old people who knew her. The creepiest example is, as a teenager we went to Disney in Florida and was chatting with an older couple with their grandkids. After a bit the woman said I look and act just like her neighbor when she was growing up. Immediately, for no reason whatsoever I blurted out, "Soy yo, Marisol." At that point the woman never said her name was Marisol. I had no idea she spoke Spanish, nor did she know I spoke Spanish. She responded deadpan, "Dora, last name. De calle ____ en Buenos Aires." I snapped back to myself and stammered I was her great-grandson. Meanwhile my mom had shivers down her spine and started to tear up. I've also had several people with dementia who knew her call me by her name and try to play the "remember when" game. And some of those things they would bring up give me strong senses of déjà vu. At my grandfather's funeral this happened dozens of times from people I've never met. One day I plan to go back to her hometown to visit if that's ever possible. She grew up outside of what was then Grodno, Poland, now Hrodna, Belarus, before moving to Buenos Aires during the Holocaust. I know traveling to Belarus isn't very common and sometimes not easy, but I wonder if I'll have some weird past life vibes being there. Not a mom, but I was a nanny for many years. This is going to be long and I apologize in advance. One of my little ones, 2 years old and incredibly smart child, way ahead developmentally in almost every way. He used to like to tell me things while we got him ready for bed. It was almost always these weird stories which would always start with, "when I was an old lady." And they were always very specific little, day in the life of, type things, which I quickly realized went beyond the life experience and typical vocabulary of a 2-year-old. Over a few months he kept adding very consistently to this story. He would also sometimes play as this old lady, with a cloth over his head and walking slowly as if his back pained him. Grocery shopping or playing with his sister's dolls as if they were his grandchildren was his favorite when he did this. He added some specific details like how many children she had, 4 daughters and a son, and how many grandchildren. Her husband had died in his 50s, same age as one of his uncles, from a lung disease. One of her daughters had died in their 30s in a car accident, leaving 2 children who she took in with the help of another daughter. She had a bad back and pain in her feet. One of her daughters would rub her feet to help with the pain. All but one of her children was married. The unmarried daughter lived with her and she worried she would never marry. She remembered dying. She had been crossing a street and hit by a car. She described how people stood around her, where it hurt, how someone eventually lifted her into a car, no ambulances, and took her to hospital where she died. I was not his only nanny, and he was consistent with these stories. Us nannies would get together and swap stories, and I would write them down because I had been fascinated with phenomena like past lives before this and wanted to see where it all went. He also described the house and neighborhood they lived in. This is especially interesting as this kid came from a super wealthy family and had never even seen the kind of housing or poverty he was describing. He also talked about living by the seaside. Months into this unfolding, we visited a seaside city on the other side of the country. One day a family member there was having a birthday party, so we piled in the van to drive over, and our driver got lost. This is pre-Google Maps and smartphone times. We ended up driving through this extremely poor neighborhood, and suddenly my little boy started shouting and screaming and insisted we turn down a couple of specific streets. He started pointing out the window and telling us things he was recognizing from when I was an old lady. It matched to what he'd previously described in general, and we were all so interested we let him direct us where to go as we were already going to be late for the party anyway. He accurately described what we would see round the next turn several times, but got extremely confused and upset when he got to where her house was because it was now a store. The driver leaned out the window and asked a nearby old person what had been there before the store and was told houses. We never went back there or were able to get any additional verification. Totally understandably his parents were concerned about this storytelling and how vivid and strange it was, so after this dramatic incident we made an active effort to redirect him to other stories and play types. As he approached 3 he started telling less and less of these stories, and they got less and less specific. By about 3.5 he couldn't even remember telling us stories about being an old lady. He thought we were joking with him. To this day, over 25 years later, I can't explain it really. Edit, thank you kindly for the updates and awards. I'm so moved. Really. I didn't think anyone would read this because I was late to this topic and I typed too much lol. I remembered some additional stuff replying to someone in the comments, so I thought I'd copy it here and add a little more. I wish I still had the notebook I was writing things down in so I could give more specific details. It's a long time ago, so I only remember the bigger highlights of it. I should mention that this did not happen in a Western country, and he was a super protected and privileged kid. He didn't even meet a child outside of his direct family till he was 3, when he started a very exclusive kindergarten after I spent several months begging his parents. He rarely watched TV, and when he did it was highly curated, pretty much just Barney. Not even Disney movies. So there wasn't really a lot of exposure to background media he could have picked this stuff up from. And us nannies didn't talk about most of the stuff he would come out with, and none of us were originally from that country either. So the super specific cultural details he would come out with would baffle us. One of them was when he would play, he'd put a cloth over his head and dance in an extremely specific way. His auntie was visiting one day and saw him do it and fell about laughing. She said he was dancing like an old woman at a wedding. Like, specifically a cultural dance traditionally done by mothers and grandmothers at weddings. There were more specific odd little validations that happened as well. Also we were specifically instructed not to encourage this play. In that culture any non-conforming behavior is not well received, so there was fear this was indication of him being other than normal. I say that in quotes because personally I believe there is no fixed, normal, everyone is valid just the way they are. So we were not leading him on and playing into this scenario he was telling us about. We would actually try and redirect him away from it. When he was 3 my husband decided to treat our son to a flight over our city in a Cessna. When it was time to get on the plane, our boy climbed into the pilot's seat and was extremely upset when he was told he had to move. He began crying and saying he was sorry. He didn't mean to crash that plane last time and he said he'd be good this time. My husband managed to calm him by pointing out that his legs were too short for his feet to reach the pedals. Once he got settled in the back seat, he started fussing about not being able to use the radio, so the pilot got him a headset, just didn't plug it in all the way. Our son then started trying to raise the tower so he could to his radio check and get clearance. At that point the pilot needed to take a break. He went for a smoke while my husband talked to our son, who told him that he crashed the last plane he flew and a lot of people died. When the pilot got back, they were able to do the flight with no further issues. About a year later, we went to an aeronautics museum when an old Mosquito was being restored. Our son told the curator that he used to fly one of those, so he offered us a tour of the plane. When we got in, our son pointed out several things that were wrong with the plane, which turned out to be correct, things like the joystick being the wrong sort, etc. The curator told us the plane had previously been modernized and was now being restored to original condition. He also confirmed that the items our son had pointed out were in fact slated to be replaced. Our kid is grown Mo and doesn't remember ever being a pilot before and has absolute zero interest in planes, but he does remember just knowing things about airplanes and piloting them. My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mom about when I was a big girl and you were a little girl. She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically, and my mom says that sounded like my mom's grandmother Grace. My sister also talked about the green house she used to live in at the end of a dirt road and the fact that her mother, my mom's great-grandmother Matilda, died from a snake bite while they lived there. She described the snake as pretty, and with the full description my mom thinks she was describing a copperhead. Now we lived in northern Nebraska, no copperheads, and Matilda died in southeast Oklahoma, Copperhead region. My sister said she killed the snake with a hoe. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, we were putting in the garden and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the hoe with a file and my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position, and later he said that she was right, he was doing it wrong. For those of you interested in timelines, this would be in 1980, my mother's grandmother Grace died in 1968, and her great-grandmother Matilda died in 1902. Also, we don't know if snake bite was the cause of death for her great-grandmother Matilda. I was 15 at the time these little nightly discussions were going on, so I remember them fairly well. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4 she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." My daughter was sick and I chalked it up to fever delirium. When she was 5 I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard her just laughing up a storm. Having this full-blown hilarious conversation with someone. My thoughts were that she either got a hold of my phone and called a grandparent or was talking to her little brother. I go into her room. She's sitting with her legs crossed on her bed looking in front of her just talking to nothing. I go and sit on the edge of the bed. She introduces me to the friend. I have never been more creeped out because the way she behaved. I felt that person in the room too. It was weird. They agreed that she needed to go back to bed so she could feel better. I got her some Gatorade and Tylenol. She went back to sleep. I never heard about the person again. Was just so weird and spooky. When she was a bit younger, she used to talk about the old man that would come visit her. I would watch her just laugh and laugh while standing up at the edge of her crib. A part of me feels like she's just really good at creeping me out. Kids, man, they really can make you question if you're sane. When I was 4 there was something about the Royal Air Force on TV that showed Lancaster bombers doing a raid somewhere. It was just a news report commemorating a raid or something, I think. Anyway, apparently when I looked up at the TV from playing with my toys, I said in the clearest words something along the lines of, "I really miss Ron from Scampton." Not sure if that's exactly how I said it. My parents asked me what I meant and I said something like, "He died in Germany." Needless to say my parents ignored it and put it down to me just messing around. There was a few things about this that were very disturbing. I was 4 years old and living in Aberdeen, Scotland at the time. There was no way I could have known about Scampton, Lincolnshire, furthermore the RAF base that was there that happened to have Lancaster bombers based there during the Second World War. Who was Ron? As I said, my family didn't know anyone named Ron, and there was nobody in my class at school named Ron either, so where could I have possibly got that name from and then roped it into a completely random sentence? At 4 years old, I had very little concept of the Second World War. At that point I probably knew it was between Germany and Allied countries, but nothing more than that. This is the very scary part that gave me chills as soon as it happened. When I was 10 I moved to Nottingham due to my parents divorcing, which also happened to be about a 40-minute drive from RAF Scampton. While in Nottingham I joined the Air Cadets, which is quite similar to the American JROTC. Essentially a starter recruitment process into the armed forces to show you what life is really like, while also being a sort of scout group. While in the Air Cadets we would do visits to interesting places, mainly to do with the RAF, and one of the visits happened to be to RAF Scampton to have a look at the history of the base and the role that it plays today. Part of the visit was to go to the cemetery where the war graves are to pay our respects, and to my absolute surprise I was shocked to see that there was a grave of a man named Ron Evans who died in a Lancaster raid over Germany in 1945. Like I said, it sent absolute chills down my spine and my hair stood on end when I saw this, like it had just struck a nerve I didn't even know I had. I had something weird happen when I was 22, but then I remembered it about 20 years later. I was in the Navy, in hospital corpsman school, which is like medical or nursing assistant. When I went through it in 1993, one whole week was devoted to pharmacy and meds. I knew all of the meds just by reading them in the textbook. It was like reading a book you've already read 10 or 20 times, I just knew all of the meds already. Somehow the name of those meds was already there in my brain. My classmates hated me for it. I couldn't understand it. But whatever. I got an A. Now, flash forward 20 years. One night I had a dream that I was back in hospital corpsman school and I was having to learn all of the meds. Except this time I was talking to one of my classmates and I was saying that I didn't need to learn the med names because it had already been drilled into my head from being a nurse for so long, of course it's going to stick. I remember the dream because I woke up as I was saying the bit about being a nurse and my husband heard me. So maybe I was a nurse in a prior life. Not apparent, but when I was young I used to have a recurring dream where I was a Roman archer trying to fend off an attack from what looked like the Mongols. I would describe the armor and weapons to my parents without having seen them myself yet. At the time, I didn't know it was Roman armor, or Mongolian clothing/weapons. Once I did finally see the armor for myself, I was like, oh yeah, that's the armor, in my dreams. I remember vividly that I was in a small line of archers next to a fort that had a tree right next to it, and the invaders came out of a seemingly dense forest on horseback. There was also a very slight hill going down from the tree, to my left. The attackers were wearing some furs and had curved swords. They easily passed through the foot soldiers, and most of our arrows missed. I remember getting struck by the sword from the man in the front, on the left side of my head. Coincidentally, there is a single gray hair that grows in the exact spot I remember getting struck. Whenever my hair would grow out a little, that gray one would show up. I've tried searching for this fort through various Google image searches, but I've only found a couple that seem similar. I don't have the dream anymore, but I can still remember what everything looked like. I'm the child. Let me explain that I consider myself rational and am, for all intents and purposes, more towards science and logic than faith or the supernatural. That said, I have no explanation for this following other than it is what I experienced. I'll do my best to summarize it. I'm 4 or under, I have a brother that's 4 years younger than me and he wasn't born yet, and I'm spending the night at my grandparents' house. They are staying up late to watch the Olympics, but the plus side to that is that I get to sleep in their bed. Normally, I would sleep in my dad's old bedroom. I am having trouble falling asleep, a common occurrence, I never slept well, but seeing the light of the TV from the other room is calming. Suddenly, I feel cold. I don't feel scared, but my body gets the shivers. A new light is in the room and it is to my right. Scared, I slowly begin to turn and, at the side of the bed, is an older woman. She is translucent and has a slight blue tint. She is not scary, but her presence is. She is sitting in the rocking chair, holding a small dog, and looking right at me. I immediately go under the blankets. I'm scared and I turn to the other side of the bed. My eyes are slammed shut. I stay like this for what feels like an eternity until, still under the blankets, I open my eyes. A new color is outside of the blankets, a warm orange replaces the light blue. Like a fool, I begin to peek out of the blankets and, at the other side of the bed, there are men on fire. They are just standing there, but they are burning. I turn around in bed and the woman is there, but now she is standing. Her mouth doesn't move, but, in my head, I hear a voice say, "They aren't there. They can't hurt anymore," and, at that point, I don't remember anything else. The next morning, I didn't get out of bed until my parents arrived. It took a lot of coaxing, but, eventually, I am able to tell my parents my nightmare. They are amused by a child's imagination. As a lark, my dad tells his parents. My grandfather, a cold and stoic man, almost passes out. When he comes to, he is crying and nonverbal. When he eventually calms down, he tells my father that, when he got back from Vietnam, he would lie in bed and suffer from panic attacks. His mother would stand over him and calm him as he relived his days as a soldier manning a flamethrower. While he slept, she would sit in the rocking chair and make sure he rested. To this day, I have no explanation for it. I don't know why I saw his memory. I have no real supernatural experience other than this, but it is burned into my brain forever.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.